In this presentation, we're going to talk about how the American government works today. And the frame that shows how the government, how it should work, is the Constitution. And so we'll be looking at different articles of the Constitution and what they say about how the government should work. Article 1 deals completely with setting up the legislative branch, or Congress. Congress is made up of two different houses. It's made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Founding Fathers, when they were initially trying to set up the government, had to decide between a couple of different plans. The representatives from Virginia had come up with the Virginia plan, and they said that we should have the bigger states have more representatives in Congress. So more lawmakers should come from those bigger states because they represent more people. And then New Jersey had their plan, which was the New Jersey plan, and they said, you know what, every single state should have the exact same say. It shouldn't matter if you're big or small or whatever. And so the people or the founding fathers decided to compromise, and they decided to make a bicameral Congress, or a Congress with two houses, and one of them fits with the New Jersey plan and one fits with the Virginia plan. The one that fits with the New Jersey plan is the Senate. Senate is completely based on equal representation. Every state, from the smallest state all the way up to the largest state, has exactly two senators. The two senators that are in Congress are in it for 6 years at a time. So every time you're elected, you have 6 years before you have to go back up for re-election if you are a senator. The requirements for being a senator are you must be at least 30 years or older, and you have to have been a citizen for 9 years, and you have to be a resident of the state in which you are running to be the senator of. So if you want to be a senator of Minnesota, you have to be a resident of Minnesota. You have to live there. Now, another member of Senate is the vice president. The vice president is elected, and they are immediately made the president of the Senate. So they're the person in charge of the Senate, and they make sure all of the rules are being followed, and that they are the votes go through and all that kind of stuff. But they don't get to vote. The only way that the vice president ever gets to vote in Senate is if there's a tie between yeses and nos, and then the vice president gets to make that decision. Now, the Virginia Plan House is the House of Representatives, and that is based on population. So the bigger the population, the more representatives that you have. The states with the smallest populations, like Alaska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and many other states, have just one representative. And it goes all the way up to some states that have over 50, like California. But there are a total of 435 members in the House of Representatives, and like I said, at least one per state. Now, if you're elected in the House of Representatives, you only get a 2-year term before you have to go back up for election again. And the requirements are not quite as stringent as they are for the Senate. You only have to be 25 years or older, and you only have to have been a citizen for 7 years. In this House of Representatives, the leader of that House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House. And so remember that, Speaker of the House, the third person in presidential succession. So they're a very powerful person, but they are the leader of the House of Representatives. The powers of Congress are that the Congress gets to make all of the laws. That's their main job, but then they do all of these other things as well. They have the right to lay and collect taxes, so they get to decide what the tax rate is, and they get to decide how to get it from the people. The third thing that they get to do is coin money, so they get to decide if new money needs to be made, or if the money needs to look different, or we need to take somebody's face off the $10 bill and put somebody else's face on it. That is Congress's decision. They also get to establish post offices, which basically, in order to become a town or a small small towns, in order to be a town, you have to have at least one post office. And so Congress really, by creating post offices, is kind of creating towns in rural areas of America. The other things they get to do are to fix standard weights and measures. So they get to decide what our standard system of measurement is. Right now we're in the imperial system where we have pounds and inches and all that kind of stuff instead of the decimal system like most of the rest of the world where they use centimeters and liters and all that kind of stuff. So that's our decision, and Congress would be the only people that could change that. The other thing that Congress can do is they can declare war on another country. So how does the Congress make a law? Well, you just watched a video that kind of outlined it for you, but I wanted to review what was in that video and allow you to take notes in your diagram that's in front of you. Now, making a law. First off, when a law is proposed, when somebody writes it up and hopes that it will become a law at some point, it is called a bill. So it is a proposed new law. It's not a law yet. If it fails, it never will become a law, but it's something that you're going to vote on to become a law. After the new law is proposed, it can be proposed in either the Senate or the House of Representatives. Then that chamber debates it and makes changes. Okay, when they debate it and make changes, then they finally realize that okay, we've made it changed enough, and we feel like we're going to have enough people vote for it. Then they have a vote. If they vote yes, then it will move to the other house. So if it starts with the House of Representatives and they vote yes, it'll move on to the Senate, and then the Senate will do the same process: debate it, make changes, and vote on it. And if either one of those houses says no, the bill is dead. So you need to completely change it to where more people will vote for it, and then you have to start the whole process over again. But if both houses vote yes and approve it, then it goes to the president. The president has two options. The president can either sign it and it becomes a law, or he can veto it. And if he vetoes it, it's no longer a law, it's dead. However, there's one way that the Senate can bring life back to a vetoed bill, and it's called an override. So if the president is just being a jerk and there's no real reason that it should be overridden, and Congress really wants this law to go through, then all they have to do is it goes back to Congress, and Congress has to vote on it, and if they vote to override a veto, they only need a 2/3 vote. And when I say only need, that means 2 out of every 3 people have to vote for it. So it's really a pretty high number. If you think about, there are 435 people in House of Representatives and 100 in Senate, that makes 535. Well, that means that 357 of those people have to vote for the law to pass in order to override a president's veto. So it is difficult, but it's possible. Article 2 of the Constitution deals with setting up the executive branch. Remember, the executive branch, their job is to enforce the laws. And so just looking quickly at the people that are in the executive branch, you have the president, who's the head of the country, the head of the executive branch. He's the most important person, kind of the driving factor of the executive branch. Also, part of the executive branch is the vice president, and the vice president advises the president and also acts, like we talked about before, as the president of the Senate. So kind of the go-between between Senate and the president. The cabinet is another group of members of the executive branch, and their jobs are to advise the president. There are also as part of the executive branch a number of different government agencies, departments and agencies. And so the wildlife department in you have the Department of Natural Resources, who we helped plant trees with. The FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, would be an executive branch. The CIA, many of these different organizations all fall under the executive branch. So we can almost think of them as like the police, or the people that are keeping us safe and making sure that our rules and regulations are being followed by companies as well as by people. The presidential election is how we elect the president. That's pretty simple. But it kind of works in a different way. It doesn't just mean if there's 100 people, you need 51 of them to vote for you. It's not a popular vote. Instead, each state, as you can see in this map right here, each state is given a certain number of electoral votes. And the electoral vote is completely dependent on population. Okay, and there is a simple equation that allows you to be able to figure out how many electoral votes are in each state. And so I'll write it down on the paper or on the slide here, and you need to make sure you have it on your paper. So it is electoral votes are equal to the number of senators plus the number of representatives. Okay, so if we look at the map up above here, then we're going to see that Washington State, right here, has 11 electoral votes. Okay, so 11. And then we know that, or we don't know how many representatives they have, so that's going to have to be our X if we're talking about algebra. And then the number of senators we know, because every single state has the same amount of senators. So that means we look at it, and that is 2, all right? So X is equal to 9. So now we can figure out the number of representatives that we have. If I were to tell you that Minnesota has 8 representatives and 2 senators, then you could instantly tell me using that equation that they have 10 electoral votes. And if I were to tell you that Michigan has 17 electoral votes and 15 representatives, you will always know they have 2 senators. Now, the 2 senators, that's the constant. That's the one thing that never changes. Do not forget this equation. This equation is very important to be able to understand how electoral votes are divided amongst the states. The powers of the president have been built more through precedent than really anything being written in the Constitution. But this is kind of, over the years, these are the powers that have developed with the president. The president has the right to veto bills, and that means that they can kill the bill and just end it unless it is overridden by Congress, as we talked about before. They also serve as the commander-in-chief, and the president serves as commander-in-chief. He is that means that he is the head of the military. And so if he's the head of the military, that means everybody has to, or all of the military, anybody in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, has to follow his instructions. So remember, the Senate had the right to declare war, but the president is in charge of the Army. So they kind of have to work together to actually go to war. The other thing the president can do dealing with other countries is he can negotiate foreign treaties. That means he can make friendships with other countries and different like trade agreements and stuff like that. The fourth thing he gets to do is federal judges, ambassadors, and other high officials. So these officials in the government that work in important areas, he gets to decide who gets each spot. Okay, now, while he does get to pick these people, Congress usually has to approve them before they go in, especially in cases like Supreme Court judges. They have to vote and approve. The next one is the president can grant pardons to federal offenders. So if someone is accused of a federal crime, the president can forgive them of that crime if he wants to. And then the proposal, or the president also can propose a law, so he can write up a law, and Congress has to look at it and debate it and vote on it. Okay, now he doesn't have any vote, but he can write one up if he would like to. The judicial branch, and especially at the highest levels, is in charge of interpreting the law. So they have to take the laws that were written and see how it applies to each individual situation, if somebody has broken that law or bent it or changed it in some way. And so in federal cases, anything dealing with multiple states, or where the DC judges have to get involved and it's a federal crime, it works in this way, and it works in almost the same way in the states too. But the district court is the lowest level of court, and that is where somebody has it's the court that you think of. It's where somebody has a trial and you decide if they're guilty or not guilty. Now, there are district courts for both civil, which are dealing with money, and criminal cases, which deal with someone having to possibly face jail time or other penalties. If something were to happen in that court case that doesn't seem fair, that one of the groups doesn't agree to, anything like that, then they would apply to try to go to the Court of Appeals. Now, what the Court of Appeals does is they review the decisions. They look at all the facts of the case and how everything went, and they say, was the law interpreted correctly? And was the law applied correctly? Or were there any mistakes made by the people who interpreted or applied the law? And then if it gets through the Court of Appeals and still hasn't been reversed, the decision hasn't been reversed, then it can go all the way up to the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court decides that they will see it, they have the final say. Okay, and so they deal with mostly constitutional laws and federal laws, and they make the decision, is this okay, or is this law not okay? And oftentimes when the Supreme Court makes a decision on something like that, or like this, it can completely throw a law out if they say it's completely unconstitutional, or it can change the way we apply laws for the rest of forever. So these people are extremely powerful members of the U.S. government. It's really pretty similar in the states. Like I said before, they have a trial and then an appellate court, so a district type court, and then a court of appeals, and then each state generally has its own Supreme Court as well. So we spent most of the last slideshow talking about amendments, and so how did those amendments get made? What does the process look like there? And so it's pretty simple, and it's written out here for you, but I'll read it real quick. The first part of it is it has to be proposed. That's that first word we want to talk about, proposed by Congress. So Congress is the one that proposes it, and 2/3 of all the congressmen have to vote for it to be proposed. That's again 357 out of the 535 congressmen have to say yes before it will even be proposed and move on to the next step. Now, the next step is that it has to be ratified by the state legislature. And so ratified by the state legislature, that means that if you count every single state, 3/4 of the states have to vote for it. So we have 50 states. If 37 people vote for, or 37 states vote for it and the rest say no, it does not go through. It takes at least 38 states out of the 50 to say yes to an amendment before it can move through. It's a very difficult process to do that, and that's why we have under 30 amendments in the history of America since the late 1700s. The next level down of governments are state governments, and state governments each have their own constitution, and their constitution deals with the same things that the U.S. Constitution does, like setting up your state and how it's going to work, and then how or what your state needs as well. So it's different from state to state. They run in different ways. All the states have three different branches. They have the executive branch, with the head executive being the governor instead of the president. The governor is kind of like the president of the state, if you want to think of it that way. And then they all have a legislature. A legislature is like their Congress. Now, just to show you an example of why or of how each state can be different, and it's different than the main national government too sometimes. One state has a different legislature than all the other ones. All the states are bicameral, meaning they have a House of Representatives and a Senate in their capital of their state, except for Nebraska. Nebraska is special because it is a unicameral state. They only have a House of Representatives. They do not have a Senate, a state Senate at all. Okay, so they're a unicameral state. So you can see, each state can do it kind of their own way if they want to. They also each have their own judiciary, meaning their own court system, which we kind of already talked about before, with the district courts, the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court in each state. Now, some of the state services that they provide law enforcement, like the state troopers, the people that work for the state. They also try to incentivize and bring in business, so they might give tax breaks or talk about, talk to businesses about some of the important reasons that it's a good state for the companies to build their headquarters in and things like that. The other thing that states do take care of is they take care of the state highways, they take care of the state parks, and they take care of public education. The way that they take care of public education is by creating the standards, or the things that we are required to teach you guys so that you're ready to move on to the next level and ready to move on to college, and also through funding, through money. The local governments are even smaller units of government, things like county governments, city governments, town governments, and the budget from this, the money that they collect from taxes, goes mostly into education. So most of the taxes collected by local governments, which are usually property taxes, go to the schools. And so if the school needs a new computer lab or a new gym or something like that, then oftentimes the people will vote if they want their property taxes to go up. And if they say yes, then the school can get their new gym. If they say no, the school can't afford to make the improvements that they want to make. Now, they also take the time in local governments to hire our service people, the people that take care of us in the areas. So firefighters. Each local government has their own firefighter. That's why if you live in Spring Lake Park, the Spring Lake Park Fire Department is going to come if you have a fire emergency. Same thing with if you live in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis Fire Department is who's going to come and help you out if you have a fire emergency. The other group of people that they hire are policemen to keep us safe, as well as garbage men to keep our streets clean and allow us to throw away our trash very simply, just by carrying it out to the curb instead of taking it to a dump ourselves. They also oversee local amenities, so they make sure that everything is up to code and everything for the roads, just the local roads by city stuff, the hospitals, the sewer, the water, libraries, parks and recreational buildings, rec centers, stuff like that. And they also do safety inspections on businesses to make sure everything's up to code, as well as homes. So a U.S. citizen, or a citizen in general, is someone who's entitled to all of the rights and privileges of a particular nation. So a U.S. citizen is a person who deserves all of the rights and privileges that we have in America. Okay? And There are 3 different requirements that you can meet to become a U.S. citizen, and you only have to meet one of these 3 requirements. Okay, so the first requirement, if you are born in the United States or have a parent who is a U.S. citizen, even if you're born somewhere else but one of your parents is a U.S. citizen, you are automatically a U.S. citizen. So being born here or having a parent who is a citizen. The second process is a legal process. It's called naturalization of becoming a citizen, and it includes an interview to see what your intentions are for being in the country, as well as a test to make sure that you understand some of the laws and history and stuff like that. It's actually a pretty difficult test, but one of my main goals this year is to have you understand enough about history and enough about the government that you would be able to pass a citizenship test if you had to take one, which none of you will because you're all citizens already. The other third requirement that is possible if you did not do either of these things is if you are 18 years old or younger and your parents were naturalized, then you automatically become a citizen. So if you're 14 years old and tomorrow your mom and dad go and get naturalized and go through the process of becoming a citizen, because you're their kid, you automatically become a citizen too. As a citizen, your rights are laid out in those first 10 amendments of the Constitution that we talked about, called the Bill of Rights. And as you need to remember, some of the other add-on amendments later on said that every single person, no matter what their race is, no matter their gender, anything like that, if you are a citizen of the United States, you are entitled to all of these rights. Okay, now the Bill of Rights has a lot of things in it, but it doesn't have everything. So remember that Amendment number 9 says there's other rights too, and if we don't think of them, you still get those. We're not taking those away just because they're not written down. The other thing is state and local governments give certain rights as well, and as a citizen of Minneapolis, you are given the right excuse me, you're given the right to do the same thing as any other person who lives in Minneapolis. And examples of that are library, right? If you live in Minneapolis, you can go to Minneapolis public libraries. If you don't, you might not be able to. So that's one of the rights that's more of a local government right. So as a citizen, you have all of those rights and all that kind of stuff, but you also have certain responsibilities. There's certain things that you have to do as a citizen and certain things that you should do as a citizen. And so those are called the duties and responsibilities of being a citizen. The things that you have to do, that you absolutely 100% have to do, is this first list, and they are called the duties of citizenship because you absolutely have to do them. Otherwise, you can be thrown in jail or have your citizenship revoked. The bottom part, what you should do if you're a good citizen, what you should do are the responsibilities. So I'll write that out so you remember it, and then I will talk about each one of them. The first one of duties, the first duty is you have to obey the laws. If you break the law, you can be put in jail or have your citizenship taken away from you. The second one is if you are charged a certain amount of taxes, you have to pay that amount of taxes the government asks you to. If you do not pay your taxes, you can again be thrown into jail. The other thing is if you are called for jury duty, you have to serve on the jury. So, if somebody said, or if you get that letter that says you need to come in, it's your turn for jury duty, you gotta come in and do it, then you actually have to go and show up, unless you have a good excuse for not going. In many different cases, if somebody depends on you and it would actually be negative consequence to somebody else if you were at jury duty, then you can get out of it. Like if I was called to jury duty, I would say, my students, I have 100 and some students, and they wouldn't be getting the same education if I wasn't around. It's really hard for them if I'm gone, and so It's better for me if I don't have to do jury duty. They might let me not go for that. Or if you are a stay-at-home mom and you have 3 or 4 kids and you need to be able to take care of those kids, then you have to. They probably would let that person go. You are paid to be on a jury, um, and so if you do end up going and being on a jury, you will be paid for your work on it. Now, the last one is if you are called to, you also are required to defend the nation. So if there is a draft, and the last time we had a draft was in 1973, then what they do is they take your number. Everybody has to sign up or all men have to sign up when they turn 18. They have to sign up for a draft card, and then they draw the numbers, and if they draw your draft number, if there's a huge war and we don't have enough soldiers, then you have to go fight. And if you don't go fight, then you can be thrown in jail. Muhammad Ali, for example, said, "No, I'm not going to fight," and he was put into jail for that. Yeah, a lot of people during the Vietnam War ran away from the war and moved to Canada because they didn't want that. So, from 18 to 24-year-olds, that is the group of people that can be drafted. But again, we haven't had a draft since 1973. Women don't need to fill out this thing. That's just one of the rules that's in the Constitution. But what happens if you don't? A lot of people say, well, what happens if I just don't do it? And what happens is the government can punish you and take certain things away from you. If you don't sign up for your draft card, then they can take away student aid and not allow you to get loans or grants or anything like that in college. They can take away government job training, so you can't train for jobs with the government. They can also take away your security clearance so that you cannot work for the government anywhere. If it gets really bad, they can take away your citizenship, and if that even doesn't stop it, if they can't even get you to sign up then they can fine you up to $250,000 or give you 5 years of prison for not showing up or not signing your draft card and making yourself eligible for the draft. So let's look at the responsibilities. These are things you should do, but if you don't, you're at least not going to get arrested. You should vote in elections. It's important because if you don't vote, then you should complain about who the president is. If you don't get out there and are not active, then you're not actually, no matter how much you complain, you're not changing what's happening in your country. And so when you get old enough, you need to be informed to get out there and vote. The other thing you need to do is watch the news and pay attention to stuff. Okay, you need to stay informed on the issues. Whatever's happening in the country, whatever the big deal is in the country, you need to understand what's happening so that you can be an informed voter and an informed citizen that can help the country instead of hurt it. The third thing you should do is you should serve the community. So in your community, you should help out a little bit. Just help people, volunteer, do things like that. Be a good citizen. The last thing you should do is to help create a just society. And the way to help create a just society is you need to tell somebody if something wrong is happening, if something unfair is happening, you need to let it be known. Okay, so you need to tell the police if someone's getting mugged around the corner. You should tell the police so that stops it from happening, and then it's less muggers will be around because they know that there's somebody out there to stop them from doing it if they try and do it. So your responsibilities, what you should do, are you should vote, be informed, volunteer, and just tell somebody if something bad is happening.